Hi there, I'm Liz and this is Flying Bobbins, and I'd like to introduce to you my latest sewing kit, the fabulously festive fabric Christmas cracker. Now this cracker can be really easily made. If you're a beginner sewer, this is a great festive project for you. They're great fun because you can put whatever you like inside and you can use them year and year again, so they're really good for the environment too. The thing I love most about these though is that you can actually reverse them. So you can use the fun and festive bright red colour for Christmas Day and then simply flip them around. And you have got a lovely, sophisticatedly sparkling cracker ready for New Year's Eve party. So yeah, you can see the other fabric in the middle there. So I hope you like those as much as I do. And you can buy a kit containing all you need to make these Christmas crackers at flyingbobbins.com, and there's a choice of colours there as well. So let's get on and see what we need to make our Christmas crackers. So let's take a look at what we get inside our Flying Bobbins sewing kit. So in each kit you get a beautiful festive printed fabric, and this is the Stag's version. You then get a contrasting fabric for the lining, and in this one it's a red and gold. And these are all beautiful premium printed cottons, 100% cotton, and feature a metallic finish, which is very, very beautiful. You get some of this. Now this is called Decoville, and it's a leather-like interfacing, and this is what helps the fabric keep its nice round shape. So you get some panels for the middle and pre-cut panels to go to either end, and you can see there how that will eventually kind of go together to create your cracker shape. You get some beautifully glittery gold binding, which goes at either end. And some gorgeously sparkly chevron ribbon to give that extra festive touch to make your bows. And of course, not as pretty, but very essential, the velcro to hold everything together. So that's what you get in your kit. I don't include thread in this kit. I think if you use a red colour, that would be the best one for this, because on the red side you don't want your thread to show up, and there is going to be some stitching on the outside. So I would use a red thread for this project. And of course you also get your very easy to follow Flying Bobbins instruction booklet as well. And each kit contains the fabric and supplies needed to make 4 beautiful Christmas crackers. So the first thing that we're going to do is to fuse our Decoville panels to our outer fabric. So lay the fabric out so that you're looking at the wrong side. Give it a little press so that you haven't got any creases or wrinkles in the fabric. And also make sure that there's no little bits of fluff that are going to get caught, bits of stray thread, etc. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do is to place with the shiny side. Can you see that this Decoville has got a glue side and a matte side? So you're going to place your Decoville with the matte side, the glue side facing down on your fabric, like so. Now let's tilt this so you can see the whole panel. These bits here, the narrow bits, go at either end, and then the larger piece goes in the middle. Now what you want to do is, these are cut 3 centimetres shorter than the fabric, so you want to leave yourself with 1.5 centimetres at the top and the bottom. That allows you to do a 1 centimetre seam and then fold the fabric over, and then this piece you want to sit in the middle. If it helps, you can just measure in 1.5 centimetres on your fabric and make a little line as a guide. I'm just doing this with a friction pen, which is a heat erasable pen, and that will help to maintain that nice even 1.5 centimetres gap that you've got at the top and the bottom. If you want, you can just do this with a tape measure or you can do it by eye. So with the narrow pieces, they're going to go right to the edge. And then you just hold the iron in place to melt the glue from that interfacing onto the fabric. And exactly the same on the other edge. Now you want to do the middle bit. Now to get this nice and centralised, you can just take your deco and fold it in half and mark the halfway point with a pen or a chalk, and then do the same on your fabric. And then if you line up those marks, you know that you're going to be halfway. So again, shiny side down, 1.5 centimetres from the top, 1.5 centimetres from the bottom, and matching up those halfway points so that we know that our fusible panel is at that halfway point. So everything is symmetrical. And you can see now how these stiffened panels will create the centre and the flutes of the cracker. And it's down these bits of fabric here that don't have the interfacing where the ribbon will cinch in either end of the cracker. So once that's all fused, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our lining fabric, and we're going to put our lining and our outer fabric together, right sides together, lining up the raw edges. And then I use wonder clips rather than pins, because pins aren't going to probably go through that leather interlining. But if you've got pins, you can give those a try. And I'm just going to clip those layers together, and then we're going to sew down here with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So my machine is threaded up with red thread. Raw edges are matching. I'm going to line up my raw edge there with my 1 centimetre line on my needle plate. I'm using a size 80 universal needle and a regular straight stitch. Back stitch at the beginning, and then off I go. So I'm not sewing through that interlining at all. And there you go. So we'll just start by pressing that seam allowance open and flat. And then we'll fold the red over the white fabric and create a nice crisp seam there. Okay, so then what we want to do is just press in either edge on the other side by 1 centimetre, and you can do that by eye, or you can measure if you like, if you would prefer. And then do the same on the other side, so pressing in by 1 centimetre all the way along that edge there. Okay, so that then what you want to do is you want to be able to fold this in half so that you've got red on one side and the white fabric or the lining fabric on one side and the patterned fabric on the other. And you want to make sure that everything is sitting really nice and flat. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to sew those edges together there. So just give it a nice press there. You don't want to be doing too much hot pressing on this metallic print. Try to keep your pressing on a medium setting and to a minimum if you can. You don't want to dull down any of that foil effect. So once you've done that, then we get our trusty wonder clips, and with everything sitting nice and flat, we're going to just sew along the edge there to secure that side. And the reason that I do it this way rather than making a tube and turning it inside out is that deco interlining, I don't want to subject it to any crumpling or creasing. I want to keep it nice and pristine, and then when we do make our cracker shape, it will be nice and a nice smooth circular shape. So I try to avoid the kind of sewing it up and then turning it inside out. So I'll just secure all those layers together, so I've got my two folded in edges tucked in there and held in place with the wonder clips, and I'm just going to sew a couple of back stitches to begin with. I'm just going to sew along that edge. There you go. So give that another quick press just where you've done your stitching. Keep everything nice and neat and tidy, and trim your thread tails as you go as well. Okay, so we're now ready for the Velcro. So we're now going to attach our Velcro. You'll have one strip with loops on it, with hooks on it, and one strip with loops on it, and that's the fuzzy one. You want to cut each of those strips down to 12 centimetres long. And then we'll take one of our strips and we want to sew that at the edge there. So at the centre, so I can feel where my edge of my interfacing is. I want that to just be at the centre there and just next to that stitch line, just up from that stitch line. And I can use a couple of wonder clips to hold that in place. Again, your typical pins might not like going through that Velcro, so I've just used wonder clips to hold that in place. And then you want to flip it over and you want to position your Velcro at the same place on the other side. So you can roll that over if you like to give you a reference point for where to line it up, but it will just roughly be at the centre edge there where I can feel that my interlining is. So there's the edge of my interlining there and there. So my Velcro is nice and central to that. Put a couple of pins there, a couple of clips rather. So we're then going to just stitch around the edge of the Velcro there and around the edge of the Velcro there. And that will allow us, once it's sewn in place, to create our loop. So if you want, you can just check that you've positioned those correctly by forming the loop, just to check. And it will work both ways, which is what gives us our reversible cracker. So back over at the machine, and I'm just going to pop that under there, and I'm just going to sew in a square around the edge. And at this point you may want to increase your stitch length just slightly, because you're going through a few layers there and it's a little bit fuzzy, that Velcro. If it starts to wander away, just make sure that your needle is down in your work, lift up your presser foot, sort of reposition everything, and then carry on again. As you come to the corner, just slow down, and you might want to hand wind that final stitch. Leaving your needle down into the fabric, you lift up your presser foot and swivel your work round, lower your presser foot again, and then you'll just continue that square or that rectangle, and then back round again, and go round in a full rectangle all the way round your Velcro until you're back at where you started again. And so when I come back to the beginning again, I'll just do a couple of back stitches back over where I started. And that's my Velcro sewn on in a square. And then I do exactly the same on the other side. So you should now have something that looks like this, with your printed fabric on one side and your lining fabric on the other side, your contrast fabric, and your Velcro sewn at either side. So it's really beginning to take shape. Finishing touch is we're going to add some gold binding to either edge. And this finishes those raw edges nicely, and it also adds a really nice sparkly touch. Now, if you find when you look at this edge here that you haven't got a really lovely straight line to work with, maybe your fabrics have come out of line a little bit, just trim everything down so that you've got a nice straight line to work with before going on to adding your binding, and it will just make your binding look really nice and crisp. But hopefully yours is looking nice and lined up there. So let's get our gold binding. So there are a couple of ways that you can do binding. It will look like this, which is a strip which has been folded in half so that the outside edges meet almost in the middle. And what we do is we just fold out the edge to meet the raw edge of our fabric edge that we want to bind. And then we just sew in that fold there, and then we fold the binding around to the right side so that the end of the cracker there gets a nice golden edge. Now you can either start on the pattern side or start on the lining side, whichever you prefer, but we're going to do this by sewing the binding down, folding it over, and then top stitching it on the right side, on the printed side. We want to make both sides nice and neat because we want these to be reversible, so that's one thing to bear in mind. Now if you're a bit more of a proficient sewer, what you can do is you can do stitching in the ditch instead, and what that means is that you sew on one side, you fold it round, and then once it's folded over, let's just make it look like it's been folded over like that, what you do is to secure the other side, you just stitch in the ditch. But that is quite tricky because what might happen is it might not quite catch on the other side. So only go for that method if you've done lots of binding before. The third option would actually be to sew on one side with the machine, fold it round, and then on the other side hand stitch it. And again, that's a personal preference. If you're very delicate with your hand stitching, that might be the best way to get a really clean look on both sides. That I'd made before, I did the whole kind of stitching it on one side, folding it over, and then stitching it on the other. And I feel that worked really well. And as you can see, I used a white thread. A white or an off-white sort of creamy coloured thread will just blend in with this gold binding quite nicely. And I just found that gave me a really nice, neat finish on both sides and was nice and easy. So that's the way that I'm going to talk you through now. So first of all, let's cut a piece of our binding, and we actually want to go a bit longer, so maybe 1.5 centimetres to 2 centimetres longer than the width of our cracker, just so that we've got a little bit of binding on either end to tuck over to make it look nice and neat at the end. I will just show you one side, and then obviously you just repeat exactly the same on the other side so that both edges are bound, but I'll just do the one side and show you that now. So I'm going to use my wonderful Wonder Clips, and I'll start by unfolding the binding and matching that up with the raw edge of my cracker there, and I'll just pop a clip there to hold that in place. So that's unfolded, raw edges matching, and with a little bit of overhang there. And I'll just put a few clips in place just to hold that nice and secure. And then we shall hop on over to the machine to stitch that down. Oops. There you go. So I'm going to line up my needle with the groove, the fold in that, or the crease I should say, in that binding. So I want my needle to sit in that crease, and I'm just going to do a straight stitch, start with a couple of stitches forward, a couple back, just to secure my stitching, and then off I go. And I just want to keep in that crease all the way down. There you go. So we will trim off any spare threads, and then we're going to use our iron to press that over to the other side, secure with Wonder Clips, and then top stitch that binding in place. There is my binding sewn on there. Now I did line up the raw edges, but sometimes what you find with binding something like this is that you fold that back there, and then when you come to fold it on the right side, you get a much narrower bound edge, and also that does not cover that original line of stitching which I want it to do. So if that happens, what we're going to do is we will just chop down those raw edges a little bit, just trim them down. And make sure that you're not cutting off your binding, you're pushing this back away, so you're just trimming down those raw edges, and that will just allow you to bring that binding round to the right side. If you don't have a rotary cutter, then just use your scissors. Hello pussycat. Of course you've come to say hello, I know. She comes and says hello every time. So there we go. Now that I've trimmed that down just by a few millimetres, that will just permit me to bring that binding through to the other side and have a nice even amount of binding on both sides, and that also therefore covers the stitching. Are you going to jump up and say hello? Yes. Okay, so we're just going to fold that over, and then before we do so, actually we need to just think about these raw ends. So actually the neatest way that I find to do this is to flatten out the binding like so, fold that in, and then fold that in, and then fold that down, and then everything is kind of nicely and neatly tucked in. So to show you that again on the other side, flatten out the binding, fold that in, fold, and fold to cover, and then pop your clip on the end. And obviously it's a good idea as well to use your iron to help you and give that a little press on your iron as well. So you can then, once you've got that all secured, and you can use your iron to make sure you've got a nice crisp fold, you're just going to stitch through all of the layers along here, and that will secure your binding, and on the reverse side you have a nice look as well. Now, like I said before, you could stitch in the ditch, but the risk is that you might not catch that all the way through, or you could hand stitch. So I just want to sew along that edge there a couple of millimeters in. Start by making sure I wind my needle down into the binding to hold it there. Little back stitch at the beginning and end. And that's now sewn in place. And on the reverse side, it just is, again, it's just on the inside edge of that gold binding. So once that binding's sewn in place, you're just going to repeat that exact same process again for the other side, and then we'll move on to our next step. There we are. So those bindings have now been sewn in place. And our cracker is pretty much almost ready. There's just one last stage that I think helps to keep it nice and stable. And what I like to do is along the edge where you've put that deco veil, is just to run a straight stitch all the way down here, all the way down here, all the way down here, and all the way down here. And because you've got sort of two layers together with this cracker, if I try and explain what I mean, they will kind of automatically come apart like this when you sort of do them up and undo them, and you know, when you're undoing the velcro, and just by putting a little stitch down there and there and down there and there, it just holds things together nicely. So what I'm going to do is, with this particular print, I'm going to put white thread on the upper, on the machine, on the needle, so that we've got white on top, and I'll put red underneath so that the stitches on here are red and won't show. If I did red both sides, it'd probably be fine actually, because there's red in this print, so it probably wouldn't show up. But just to show you the effect, I think I'll go white on top, red on the bottom, and I'll just do those lines of stitching just to hold everything in place. Okay, so before you go ahead and sew, what you might like to do is just draw some lines on as a guide, so that you're sewing nice and straight. So I'll use my quilter's ruler. I'm going to draw a line on at 5.5 in from the edge there, and then at 11.5 in from the edge, and then same on the other side, 5.5 in from the edge, 11.5 in from the edge, and then I'm using a friction pen which will come out with heat, but that will just give me a guide so that it makes it easy for me to sew my straight lines down there. If you don't have a quilter's ruler like this, then you could just sort of measure in and draw your line on, but it keeps these aren't really going to show. This is just to keep everything together, to keep the cracker nice and you know, looking good for longer. I'm just going to follow that line down. Back stitch at the end, and that black pen mark will come out when I put the iron on it, and then on the other side it's red. So I will just do that for all 4 of those lines, and that will just make everything stay together nicely. And there we have it. So I've sewn those 4 lines. I just need to trim off my threads. And we're done. Give it a little press, and our cracker is made. One finishing touch, which is of course to add the ribbon. So if you cut 2 pieces of ribbon, which are roughly 55 centimetres long, and then I like to cut a slanted angle at the end. To stop those from fraying, you can just paint them with a little bit of clear nail varnish or a little bit of fray stop solution. And that will help to stop them from fraying. The other thing you can do is if you get a cigarette lighter and hold the flame underneath, the Lurex will shrivel up, and that will also help, and that's what I've done on this one here. So you can't really see, but it stopped it from fraying. So just very carefully hold a flame underneath and just singe the Lurexy bits, and that will help as well. But if you're not happy doing that, then use some fray stop solution or some clear nail varnish. And of course, be very careful if you are using a flame and all of that jazz. So to make our cracker, we just put it round in a circle like this, and then we're going to use our ribbon to tie up either end. And tie a little bow. And all that you have to do now is decide what you're going to put inside. All ready for the Christmas table. And then if you wanted to do them the other way round, you just simply roll it the other way. And you've got a whole different look. And there it is in beautiful festive red. I wonder what's inside my cracker. A stitch unpick? That's no good. Exciting. Hey. Raspberry gin. Thanks very much. That's more like it. Merry Christmas, everyone.